I've talked on this channel before about wrestlers that were synonymous with one promotion being plugged into another and the results being not what the fans had hoped. For every Rob Van Dam who thrived in his new setting post ECW, there's a Sandman who described the experience of working for WWE as soul-sucking. While Sandman managed to last a little over a year, even getting inexplicably drafted to Raw, another ECW act that didn't fare too well on Monday nights just lasted 2 months. That act is the Public Enemy, one of the highlights of the early days of ECW who didn't quite thrive elsewhere. In this video, we'll look at the Public Enemy's run in WWE in 1999. We'll look at their path to get there, what happened and how it all went wrong. For this video, I'm going to be skipping quite a few details about their time in ECW and WCW, because I'm sure you've noticed that this video is quite long as it is. Downstairs there are timestamps if you want to skip to that, but there are also some interesting things about their early career that I found out. Ted Petty made his name as the Flyboy, but he was actually older than you might think. His in-ring career began in 1978 when he was 25 years old, making him 40 when he arrived at ECW. Having been trained by Alpha of the Wild Samoans, Petty began his career as the masked Cheetah Kid. He would wrestle using the mask gimmick for New Japan Pro Wrestling and Herb Abrams' UWF among others. In 1990, he would have a brief run in WCW as Colonel de Klerk, teaming with Sergeant Kruger, also known as Ray Apollo, one of the men to play Doink the Clown officially in WWE. The South African-inspired Kruger and de Klerk competed on television and even appeared on a Clash of the Champions special and that year's Starrcade as part of the Pat O'Connor International Tag Team Tournament. But Petty would soon be gone from WCW, following a disastrous match where the Steiners didn't exactly get along in the ring with Apollo or Petty. As the Cheetah Kid, Petty would wrestle a couple of enhancement matches for WWE in early '93 against Johnny Rotten, soon to be his new tag team partner. One such match occurred on January 11th, '93 at the Manhattan Center in New York, as a dark match before the first ever episode of Monday Night Raw. Michael Durham, later known as Johnny Rotten, then Johnny Grunge, was 12 years younger than his tag team partner, and would enter wrestling nearly a decade later. He would do a fair bit of enhancement work for WWE in 1990 using his real name, and would also wrestle for the UWF as Equalizer Zap, but as best I can tell, not at the same time as the Cheetah Kid. According to Johnny Grunge's obituary in the Wrestling Observer, he and Rocco Rock met Paul Heyman in 1993, when Heyman was booking a tour in the Philippines that both wrestled on. On September 18th, 1993, Paul Heyman first took over as booker of ECW. On that same night, the Public Enemy would make their debut. The team can be thought of as Paul's first project, as he put the team together and the gimmick was his creation. The idea was to have two white hoodies who were extremely violent. He gave them the interview tagline, "We are the first generation of American children more afraid of living than dying." This line was apparently inspired by a Newsweek article that Paul had read, about the cultural changes taking place in America, and about the problems for young men in places like South Central in Los Angeles and Washington Heights in New York. In the 2006 book called The Rise and Fall of ECW, Paul is quoted as saying that they weren't named Public Enemy after the rap group, but The Public Enemy after the 1931 James Cagney film. I believe this is commonly known as a legal distinction. It's no overstatement to say that the Public Enemy were one of the most important acts in ECW's early years. When Rocco Rock passed away in 2002, his obituary in the Wrestling Observer said they were the face of the promotion during the period it started being put on the map, with regular sellouts of the ECW arena and popularizing the three-way dance concept. When the company dropped Eastern from its name and went extreme, the catalyst was Shane Douglas's infamous promo where he threw down the NWA World title, but the Public Enemy were part of an equally iconic visual. On the August 30th, 1994 episode of Hardcore TV, the same episode where Douglas's promo aired, the broadcast would end with Rock and Grunge vandalizing the ECW logo banner, crossing out the word Eastern and spray painting Extreme on it. The banner would stay on the program, as a visual representation that you weren't watching the old NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling anymore. On November 19th, 1995, at Survivor Series no less, the Public Enemy would compete in a dark match against the then tag team champions, the Smoking Guns. This was essentially a tryout match in front of a pay-per-view crowd against a top tag team. Called Public Enemy, they wouldn't have used that handle had the match been televised. It was described to us as an unimpressive, almost squash-like warm-up match. They got a great reaction by the ECW fans at the show, but most of the fans didn't react to them nor know who they were. While some might think that this was a tryout of sorts, Dave Meltzer seems to have thought differently. He says it was a one-shot deal and not a sign that they made the decision to go to WWF. From what we're told, they're strongly leaning towards WCW and that the final decision should be made this week. As alluded to earlier, it's highly unlikely that in a new generation WWF, they would have been able to keep their name and gimmick, and they certainly wouldn't have been putting anyone through tables. So if they were going to keep their gimmick in a bigger promotion, WCW might well have been the way to go. The two would debut on the January 15th episode of Nitro, defeating the American Males. They would briefly hold the tag team titles once later in the year, and stay around until August 98, last losing to the Dancing Fools, Disco Inferno and Alex Wright. Having not been seen on WCW events in months, the Public Enemy would be quietly released from the company. So quietly, it wouldn't be reported until November. Public Enemy and Ultimo Dragon have been dropped from the roster. PE has contacted ECW about returning, and it wouldn't be surprising if they went back for a short run against the Dudleys, but long run is questionable. The Pro Wrestling Torch also notes that their contracts were due to expire in January. If they hadn't been used since August, and this was being reported in November, clearly the writing was on the wall. A couple of weeks later, it would seem that ECW was teasing an altercation between ECW's first and current top tag teams. On the November 21st Hardcore TV, the Dudleys' 5th ECW tag team title reign, which had begun on November 6th, had been noted to have broken the previous record held by Grunge and Rocco. By the time the Public Enemy would return in January, Bubba and Devon would no longer be the champions, having lost to Rob Van Dam and Sabu. But the Observer still noted that Public Enemy themselves are hoping more to be picked up by WWF. And anything is possible, but since WWF already has the oddities, I can't see it. That comparison doesn't sound the most flattering, and it's probably a sign of what's to come. Incidentally, the oddities would break up following a beatdown by the Ministry on the February 28th episode of Sunday Night Heat, meaning that they and the Public Enemy overlapped by a week or two. Mystic Dave might have had a point there. On January 16th, 1999, Public Enemy would return to ECW at House Party. It took so long from their WCW release for them to arrive in ECW because they had disagreed on money, as Dave Meltzer had reported in The Observer in December. Leading up to House Party, Bubba Ray Dudley had laid out a challenge on ECW TV. Them versus the Public Enemy feels like a meeting of two eras of ECW in a way. House Party wasn't supposed to be a one-off, although it isn't decided which shows or for how long, as nothing is locked. With the heavily teased return of the Public Enemy, as well as the ECW Arena debut of Sid, who made his first appearance for the company a week earlier at Guilty as Charged, the ECW Arena was said to be fully sold out, with 1,700 fans there. The show was heavily delayed, as Sid missed his flight and didn't arrive at the airport until close to 11 PM. Another way they stalled the show was by teasing that Public Enemy weren't showing up. To begin the show, their music would play, only for Danny Doring and Roadkill to come out instead. Later in the night, the Dudleys had a segment in the ring where they told the crowd that Grunge and Rocco weren't coming. As Sid was so late to the building, he ended up having the last match of the night against Skull Von Crush, but the real main event was coming up next. The Dudleys would return to the ring to goad the fans even more. Bubba and Devon returned dressed as Rocco and Grunge to swerve the fans, even coming out to their music. Eventually, Here Comes the Hot Stepper would play, and the real Public Enemy would run out. When this aired on the January 30th episode of Hardcore TV, we would see a brief glimpse of them taking on the Dudleys, then the show would end. On the House Party 99 home video release, a former rival of the Public Enemy, who was now feuding with the Dudleys, New Jack, would bring in a can of weapons to even the odds. There wasn't a match as such, more a wild brawl that Public Enemy came out on top of. To end the night, Johnny Grunge tells the crowd that it's good to be home, and professes the team's love for ECW. According to the following Observer, Public Enemy will be doing some dates including Detroit this week, and almost surely wrestling Dudleys, but they won't be regulars at this point. As we got into February, it still seemed that Grunge and Rock were sticking around for a while longer. They appeared on the Detroit event on January 23rd, and had another fight with the Dudleys which would air on February 6th, sort of. Only parts of this fight would air, and the reason for this might have been revealed in the Observer, as the report that Dave published claims that the crowd weren't into the segment, and it all went to pot when Johnny Grunge no-sold the 3D, a highly protected move at the time. Dave also notes that according to the plan, Public Enemy was set to appear at Living Dangerously in March, but that would end up not happening. A note from the Pro Wrestling Torch might explain a bit why the Public Enemy didn't stay all too long in their second run, as Wade Keller reported that they'd been disappointed by the reaction they received at House Party. Although they got a good pop for their January 16th return to ECW, when they went into the crowd to dance, only about 1/3 of the fans waved their arms with them. A lot of fans who attend ECW Arena aren't the same who were there over 2 years ago, last time the Public Enemy headlined. Those who remain from that era might not forgive the Public Enemy for becoming a comedy jobber tag team in WCW. Wade also added that Paul Heyman's main goal for them at this point was to use them to help build the Dudleys more, and Rocco and Grunge likely knew this. A week later, it would be reported in the Observer that the Public Enemy might be WWE bound after all. The WWF has offered them a contract to start at television imminently. They had originally looked for work from the WWF when their WCW deal expired, but were turned down. But Terry Taylor came up with an idea for them, and they were offered a contract last week. Remember that last part for later, about an idea being had for them when we get to what they actually did in WWE. The Torch offered more information on this, saying they were backstage at Raw on Monday, and on Tuesday were in Stamford, Connecticut to sign their actual contract. A downside guarantee said to be in the $125,000 to $175,000 range. The next week it was reported that they had in fact signed, with a quite interesting tidbit about their name. Paul Heyman actually owns the right to the name Public Enemy for pro wrestling purposes. I know that nobody believed that one, but the WWF checked it out, and it turned out to be true, but allowed WCW to use the name. Wade Keller notes that they left ECW on bad terms, as Paul Heyman had hoped that they would stay at least until Living Dangerously, for a match with the Dudleys, where you would guess that the Dudleys would win. Heyman had a heated conversation with Johnny Grunge the day before the show, when Grunge informed them they didn't plan to show up. Heyman supposedly said he wouldn't forget them walking out on him. It's very clear that he didn't, because for weeks afterwards, the Dudleys would continue to bury the Public Enemy, which obviously wasn't going to lead anywhere. The Public Enemy would make their televised WWE debut at a Raw taping on February 16th, 1999. During their time as superstars, they would wrestle just 7 matches on television, and we're gonna go through all of them here. In match number 1, which aired on February 22nd, 1999, Rocco and Grunge would make their unannounced entrances and wrestle Edge and Gangrel of the Brood. Before the bell even rings, the Brood go on the attack. Not a single tag happens in the entire match, with referee Mike Chioda at one point reaching a 5 count and just deciding not to DQ anyone. The Public Enemy hit some good-looking double team moves until Christian runs in, giving Public Enemy the DQ victory. Before the segment can end, Grunge and Rocco are the victims of a Brood bloodbath, and the crowd are barely alive for any of it. Dave Meltzer was a little less kind than I'm being. Didn't take long for PE to look bad. They don't take bumps, Grunge has put on even more weight, and both looked real slow. They got no reaction. In the Torch, despite an equally negative review, Wade Keller speculated if a match between Public Enemy and the Brood was being planned for WrestleMania 15, and honestly, there was probably less chance of that than the Dudleys match happening. In the next match that would air on February 28th, Public Enemy would defeat a team on the rise in the Hardy Boys. While Matt and Jeff weren't much of anything at the start of '99, they would be well on their way to becoming huge stars by the end of the year. Very early in the match, the Brood would stand on the stage watching. Mid-match, Public Enemy would put Matt through a table with a move I don't think anybody would want to take, as the weight of both Rocco and Grunge crashed onto him. Then they would pin Matt, and the Brood would attack afterwards. The whole match would again last 2 minutes, quite long for the Attitude Era, but at least this one ended by pinfall. The next night, on the March 1st Raw, Public Enemy didn't wrestle, but it was becoming very clear where they stood against the Brood. The team came out to the Brood's music, dressed up as them, which seemed like a pretty common trope in the 90s. Public Enemy would take the microphone and tell us that they aren't afraid, and as if on cue, the lights would go out in the arena, and when they came back on, Rocco Rock had disappeared. Later in the night we would find out what happened to Rocco. While the cameraman was running back into the building following a wild brawl outside, we very briefly see Rocco strung up, covered in blood, while Johnny Grunge yells into the void for help. After taking 2 beatdowns already, and having just told us they weren't scared, this didn't help their image much. Next, the Public Enemy would have their most infamous match in WWE. On the March 7th Sunday Night Heat episode, they would face the Acolytes. To make things even worse, this match would actually take place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right in ECW country, on the same night that Kurt Angle would make an appearance, while he was still in training. The brief match resembles an absolute mauling, with Bradshaw and Farouk not letting Public Enemy get anything in. Bradshaw even breaks a chair outside the ring on Johnny Grunge's back, as Farouk drops the stairs on Rocco. After Bradshaw puts Grunge through a table, and swings the now broken chair a few more times, the referee finally calls for the bell. Kevin Kelly and Terry Taylor on commentary try to explain that The Undertaker had ordered the Acolytes to do this, on behalf of their ministry teammates in the Brood. And the beating was so bad, they question if we'll ever see the Public Enemy again. On a 2019 episode of Something to Wrestle, Bruce Pritchard explains that right before the 4 men were due to walk through the curtain, the Public Enemy refused to go through a table, which was the planned finish for the match. Given how tied to putting others through tables the Public Enemy were, I found this explanation a bit odd. Bruce doubles down though, by claiming that they could dish it out but couldn't take it. When challenged on this by Conrad, Bruce even condones what the Acolytes did, saying that Rocco and Grunge weren't cooperating, and implying that the mauling is what they deserved for it. For what it's worth, the PW Torch gave a similar version of events at the time. Public Enemy disputed the planned finish of them doing a job against the Acolytes at the March 2nd Raw taping, to send PE, who are new to the WWF, a message about such protests. Bradshaw and Farouk wrestled an overly stiff match, and didn't give PE any offense at all. Bradshaw was especially upset, and he's the wrong guy to be on the wrong side of. When Public Enemy returned to the back after the match, Rocco tried to save face by saying the match was easy. In March 2024, JBL would note on Twitter that he never actually found out why Public Enemy refused to do the finish, or what their idea was. By the looks of it when you watch this match, he didn't take all that much time to ask. In August 2021, Bradshaw on his podcast with Gerald Briscoe discussed this match with its referee Jim Corderas. JBL's side of things, and remember this is Bradshaw talking, is that the Public Enemy refused the finish right as their music was playing and they went through the curtain. So when he and Farouk followed, they weren't sure what was to come, but assumed it would be a fight. One final note from this match comes from an issue of The Torch weeks later, as it's noted that a former ECW colleague of the Public Enemy objected to what the Acolytes had done. Mick Foley spoke out in the locker room against the Acolytes' retaliation. He considered it unprofessional. It's very bold of Mick to speak out against such behaviour, and have no receipt come back to it. To be clear, I have no idea if this is related, and Mankind does defeat the Acolytes quite a lot in that year, but it did catch my attention. On the following week's episode of Heat on March 14th, Michael Cole attempted to interview the Public Enemy. He tells them that it seems like none of the other wrestlers want them in WWE. And just as Rocco begins to address this, the Brood attacks again, leading to a pull-apart brawl. Here begins the new story for the team, where wrestlers and later officials would openly show contempt towards them. The problem is, it doesn't feel like just a storyline. People are already talking about the hiring of Public Enemy as being a mistake. Johnny Grunge in particular just looks totally out of his league in the WWF. If you watch the Heat match against the Acolytes, both guys, Bradshaw in particular, were stiffing them left and right on spots. Some of the stuff Bradshaw was throwing was really brutal. Apparently this was meant as a message and was condoned by those in charge. Remember when I told you earlier that Terry Taylor had got them hired with an idea in mind? I imagine this wasn't it. Fourth on the list is the team's second and last match on Raw, where they would lose a tag team championship match against Owen Hart and Jeff Jarrett in just a couple of minutes. This match is notable for two things. Firstly, the reveal right before it of heel Jim Ross's own personal announce table that was positioned right in front of Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler. This is a subject to go into a whole other time, but a quite funny idea, executed far better than the coal mine years later. Secondly, the end of the match comes when Jeff Jarrett, right in front of referee Mike Chioda, decks Johnny Grunge with a guitar. Instead of disqualifying Jarrett, Mike turns around, literally looking the other way, and turns back to count the pin. Michael Cole even makes the point that it should have been a DQ, and Lawler responds that it looks like even the referees don't want Public Enemy in the company any more than the wrestlers do. It seems that Art may have been imitating life here, as Dave elaborates. The angle that nobody wants them in WWF stems from the idea that many believe signing them was a bad idea to begin with, and it has nothing to do with where they came from, and everything to do with the fact they stand out like a sore thumb in their matches. If you were under any illusion as to where the Public Enemy stood in WWE, on March 28th, on the Sunday Night Heat that took place before WrestleMania 15, they were entered into a battle royal to determine who would challenge for the tag team titles on the main show. As soon as the match begins, everyone else in the ring teams up to throw Public Enemy out first, with the makeshift team of D'Lo Brown and Test getting the match later on. This would be the closest the Public Enemy would ever get to a match on WrestleMania. And again, they were buried in Philadelphia, where they first got popular in ECW. Rock and Grunge's final two matches for WWE would take place on Shotgun Saturday night, a clear sign that things aren't going too well. On April 3rd, they would lose a 4-team bout along with DOA members Skull and 8-Ball, more famously known as the Harris Brothers, and the Hardys, to the winners, Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor, known at this time as Too Much. At over 6 minutes, this would be the longest match the Public Enemy would have for the company, but only technically. Throughout the match, no other team would let them tag in, with Too Much openly mocking them in the ring. The end comes when the Public Enemy finally do get in the ring, and are piled on by all the other wrestlers. Because Scott Taylor is the one at the bottom of the pile, which is to say he pinned them first, Too Much are declared the winners, and the other losing teams don't seem all that bothered. Finally, Public Enemy would have their last match for the company on April 10th, 1999, losing to the Hardys. This is very much the closest thing the Public Enemy have in WWE to a regular tag team match that's given some time. I say almost, because the end comes when the Public Enemy decide to put Jeff through a table, leading to a DQ win for the Hardys. Johnny Grunge seems almost annoyed at this, perhaps thinking that they might not get DQ'd, which seems strange at first, until I remembered that in the first match they had, they put Matt through a table and weren't disqualified. The rules, it seems, applied more to the Public Enemy than they had before. Kevin Kelly and Terry Taylor on commentary note that Public Enemy seemed to be taking a stand against being singled out by the locker room. I wonder how that would go. A couple of days later, on April 12th, at a TV taping in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Grunge and Rocco were informed that they had been released from WWE. They wouldn't be alone though, as several others would be too, though the full list wasn't known yet. In the April 26th Observer, far more information was published. Among those released were Gillberg, who was the light heavyweight champion at the time, and was still recognised as such when he was brought back a few months later. The Blue Meanie, George Steele and Golga, who had nothing to do since the Oddities had been split up, Steve Williams, Skull and 8-Ball of the DOA, Bart Gunn, who had last been seen at WrestleMania, the Legion of Doom, Sniper of the Truth Commission, and Fatu, who would be brought back later in the year and become Rikishi. Of those names, only 2 had appeared on WrestleMania a couple of weeks earlier, that being Bart Gunn, who lost the Brawl for All match, and the Blue Meanie, who accompanied Goldust to the ring. A few more competed in the Battle Royal on Heat, but as Dave notes, many of the names on the list were not a surprise. While in recent years we see a post-WrestleMania culling of wrestlers regularly, this can't have been as common back then, judging by the reactions of Meltzer and Keller, who note how well the company is doing in the late 90s. Dave even claims that WWE was in its strongest financial condition in history to that point, giving the idea that these cuts were made because of creative decisions and not financial ones. In his write-up at the time of the Public Enemy's release, Dave calls the team basically a failure from day one, but points to the Acolytes match as the straw that broke the camel's back. At that point, when it became pretty clear that they weren't getting over, and their work wasn't up to par, and the word got out they had no future, they were actually given a short-term gimmick of being the wrestlers that nobody in the company even wanted around. Having watched their entire WWE run, I'd be willing to argue that this assessment is a bit harsh. They weren't ever introduced to the audience properly. Walking out onto Raw and into a feud with the Brood, the Public Enemy would get beaten down and made to look less than by the Brood on a weekly basis. The same Brood who were part of a much bigger storyline at the same time, in the Ministry of Darkness vs Vince McMahon's corporation. Their matches weren't very long and had no real structure to them, with their debut especially just being a series of double team moves, until the DQ finish. I think it's more fair to say that they weren't ever really given a fair shot to begin with, or a chance to connect with the fans. They were here today, broke a few tables and chairs, and gone not long after. In June 1999, WWF Magazine would actually profile the Public Enemy in their Rookies to Legends page. The piece is very thorough in covering the team's time in ECW as well as even WCW. What it doesn't mention though is that Grunge and Rocco were already in talks to rejoin WCW by the time this issue came out. Granted, the magazine was likely written a fair bit ahead of time, but that's still something that probably should have been proofread. By August, the Public Enemy would be back in WCW, but they were gone again within a few weeks. The team would remain active on the Indies, working international tours in Puerto Rico and Australia in 2000, and more in the US until a couple of weeks before Rocco Rock's death in September 2002 at age 49. You might well be wondering what Rocco Rock or Johnny Grunge had to say about their time in WWE. Well, it's a bit of a struggle to find any comments from either of them, as shoot interviews nor talking about what was going on inside wrestling were as commonplace as they are today. I did find this odd bloke though, who attempts to interview people from beyond the grave. Now I don't know about you, but I can't imagine watching some English fella on YouTube who's clearly sitting in his bedroom. I'm not even talking about him by the way, but thank you. In June 2005, on the weekend of Hardcore Homecoming and One Night Stand, tributes were made to Rocco as well as other fallen ECW alumni. On the Shane Douglas promoted show on June 10, 2005, Johnny Grunge, Pitbull Gary Wolf and Tammy Lynn Sitch would take part in an in-ring segment to pay tribute to Rocco, Wolf's partner Anthony Durante, and the recently passed Chris Candido. Meanwhile, on the WWE-produced event on June 12th, he was shown as part of an in memoriam video package. That's not the only tribute to him though, as since 2002, a tournament first promoted by Ian Rotten in 2000 began bearing his name. The Ted Petty Invitational Tournament has to date run 13 times, and in the early years had a reputation for highlighting some of the best young indie talent before they got signed to bigger things. Many future world champions appeared in the Ted Petty tournament, with the 2004 version being commonly thought of as the standout year. In 2006, Johnny Grunge would also pass away at the age of 40, the same age Rocco Rock was when the two debuted in ECW. To this day, banners hang from the ceiling of the building formerly known as the ECW Arena, paying tribute to, among others, the Public Enemy. These banners hang permanently and are representative of the Hardcore Hall of Fame, which was first established after Rocco's death. At the start of this video, I mentioned that the Public Enemy thrived in ECW, but didn't seem to anywhere else. A lot of people give the credit for this to Paul Heyman, for his booking philosophy of accentuating people's positives and hiding their negatives. Dave Meltzer, writing in 2000, puts it this way: Public Enemy was the most important act for probably a year in a building company and the subject of a bidding war from WWF and WCW when they wanted to move on. This is all living proof that a good booker and some team players can make not just fans, but nearly everyone in the industry think people with little inherent ability are big stars. He means this negatively, but you can also see the positive side there, that for a few years they came across as big stars to an entire audience, even if they couldn't achieve that elsewhere. As I hope I've shown in this video, not necessarily by their own fault. It's not hard to feel like the two were hard done by. Rocco passed away in 2002 from a genetic heart condition, and Grunge in 2006. It would have felt special to have seen them get some kind of vindication either at One Night Stand or Hardcore Homecoming, or even in TNA or Ring of Honor in the years that followed. Anything but hardcore justice though, as we could all do without Jonathan New Metal and Rocco Stone appearing in the Impact Zone. Although maybe we could have gotten that Team 3D match. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please consider commenting, leaving a like or subscribing.